This is For Your Info Podcasts, a production of Solutions by CAT. Welcome to a breakfast series by Assets Lancaster, transforming communities through business. This October 2015 installment is Shared Ownership. Thanks to our sponsors, ERX Contracting and Solutions by CAT, marketing and advertising with passion.
To say about Ted, he'll give you more as we go, but the format for this morning is that he'll speak for 20-25 minutes, go through a bit of a presentation. Feel free to keep eating, get refills if you need, and then we'll have opportunity for a couple of questions and some table discussions about seeing are there opportunities for some of these ideas and principles that you're seeing about Cleveland to maybe take root in Lancaster, see if there's interest, questions, opportunities that emerge at your tables, and then a little bit of time to talk back as well. So without further ado, that's all I have to say. Thanks, Ted.
Thank you.
Oh, one more thing, I'm sorry. Thank you again to Solutions by CAT and the For Your Info podcasts. They are recording this, and so if anybody has any issues with being recorded, just make sure to let them know at the end of the session. So those are going to be available in a way to keep these ideas kind of spreading further. Thanks.
Great, thank you. Thanks, Jessica. Good morning, everyone. You all are a little far out there. I'm not used to this sort of thing, so I may roam around a little bit. Thank you for making time this morning, and I hope everyone's being to partake of this extraordinary vegetarian breakfast that we have. And actually, that little company is relevant to this presentation I'm giving, so I'll talk about that. So let me just launch right into this. I'm going to be talking about community wealth building. Some of it at the beginning is sort of a broader frame. What do we mean by community wealth building? Where are models of this starting to emerge around the country? What is its possible relevance to a community like yours? And then I'll conclude by telling a bit of the story of Cleveland, Ohio, where I am. And I tell that story not because, or the way to listen to it is not so much, isn't this interesting or not, what's happening in Cleveland, but are there some things happening in that community that might have some relevance here? I'm living in Cleveland now, have been for 5 or 6 years. Before that, I was living and working in Washington, D.C. I love Washington, D.C., but I actually love more being outside the Beltway in places like where you all live. So let's just get right into this. So what do I mean by community wealth building? It's really a sort of systems approach to local economic development. And I know many of you are involved in economic development and business activity and so forth. And all of our communities have, a lot of tremendous assets, and we're all having a fair amount of problems too. I read some of the poverty report that came out here. I know the poverty level in this community is about 25%. In Cleveland, it's 40%. 40% of all the residents in Cleveland, Ohio, a city of about 390,000 people, live below the poverty line. And by the way, if the United States government calculated poverty in the way that all other major economies like ours in Europe and Canada and New Zealand, Australia and so forth, if we calculated poverty in the United States using the same methodology that other countries have, we, the United States, with the largest economy still in the world, although China's gaining fast, the most successful and productive economy in the history of the planet, we would have more than 70 million people in our country living below the poverty line. So community wealth building is not just about poor folks, but one of the things it says is we just can't continue to be the sort of country we want and the community we want if we're going to leave so many people behind. Now, how they got behind, we can all argue about that, and who is responsible, and what's their responsibility, and what's the government's of business, and offshoring, and all kinds of things. But our assertion is for the future of our democracy and the future of our economies, we've got to find a way to include people in the economy who are now being excluded. If for no other reason, then it is extremely costly to not include those folks in terms of the cost of incarceration, welfare, crime, so many things where people haven't had an opportunity to really participate. So community wealth building is a systems approach. It says, you know, we can't just tinker around the edges here. We actually need to change the system where we live to create a kind of new normal, a new sort of acceptable practice in our community and how we're going to govern our economy. And so the aim is creating a new system where communities thrive and families enjoy economic security. It is about business development, but at the end of the day, it's really about developing our communities and reviving our local economies. So this is a bit of a picture of what's happening in the United States. A study just came out from the Century Foundation, which is a kind of nonpartisan research effort. This came out in the last 2 months, and this is some of what it found. Over the last 10 years, throughout the United States, excuse me, there's been a dramatic increase in the number of high-poverty neighborhoods in the United States, even as the economy post-recession has been booming, as we know. The number of people living in high-poverty ghettos, barrios, and slums has nearly doubled in the United States since the year 2000, in 15 years. Of 339 cities, larger than yours, but 75,000 population or more, 90% of the inner cities of those over 300 communities have become increasingly destabilized in terms of poverty and unemployment. Half of all children at the age of 5 in the United States live in low-income communities. So clearly this isn't a marginal problem. It's right at the heart of who we are these days. So community wealth building looks at these sets of problems. And by the way, I'm happy to leave this PowerPoint with Jessica and anyone who wants it. We're a very open source organization, so you're quite welcome to it. We're issuing a report next month in November, contrasting traditional economic development to this community wealth building approach. And these are some of the drivers of community wealth building. First of all, it really emphasizes place. It says, for instance, neighborhoods really matter. In Northeast Ohio, what we tend to do in economic development is focus on the region. And we said, well, the region of Northeast Ohio is starting to do pretty good. And the assumption is that some of those benefits will trickle down to those most in need. But that just doesn't happen. You've had a different situation here from the different reports that I've read, both the poverty report, but I guess it's called Building on Our Strengths report. It's the more economic development strategy, where you've had some real success downtown, and I got to tour downtown a bit when I came in. It's lovely, because I go to so many communities and just see that hollowed out downtown, where there's just nothing left, and it's so tragic. And the revitalization of your downtown has really been terrific. But in the neighborhoods, things aren't going quite so well. And that's just a common problem. So throughout the country, it's not just a Lancaster problem, it's around the country. So place really matters in community wealth building, emphasizing place and focusing on how do we move the needle in these neighborhoods, for instance. Ownership really matters. Community wealth building tends to try to build up local for-profit businesses that have the characteristic of broader ownership, cooperatives, employee ownership. I'll show you some of these models in a minute. Social enterprise. It really says, you know, we can get more economic impact if we don't just emphasize businesses that are owned by an individual. And I'm all for that. So small businesses, small business ownership, I'm all for. But it also says if we can bring more people into having an equity stake in these businesses, as they're profitable, more people will share in the profits. So it tries to emphasize not only community-owned businesses, local businesses, rather than absentee ownership, but broadly shared business ownership. And this is not just a theory, this is happening all over the country, as you'll see. It focuses a lot on multipliers, an economic term, which means rather than letting money leak out of your community, keeping the spending local so that you get a multiplier effect as, you know, I'm buying, instead of, let's say I'm Franklin Marshall University, instead of buying my widgets from a company in Chicago or San Francisco or China, I look to see how to buy them from a business here locally. And then that businesswoman or that businessman goes and with the money they've gotten from F&M, then goes out and spends it with another local vendor. And you start to get a multiplier effect rather than the leakage effect. In Cleveland, for instance, in Northeast Ohio actually, we spend in this multi-county area, the calculation is going to we spend $8 billion a year on food. Like you eat a lot in Northeast Ohio. $8 billion a year, of which only $300 million of that food is grown or processed or value added anywhere in Northeast Ohio. So you have billions of dollars going to Mexico and to California and to Arizona as all this food is imported in. What could happen if we could capture even 25% of that $8 billion? What could happen to the local economy? So that's what multipliers are. And the last one I'll mention there is inclusion. So much of economic development is simply predicated on, it's a kind of scorecard. So cities say, look, we created over the last 18 months 500 jobs or 1,000 jobs. But it doesn't really say, well, who got those jobs? What was the quality of those jobs? I was working a couple years ago in Amarillo, Texas. Very interesting place in the panhandle of Texas. It's in the red-blue dynamic in the United States. It is truly the reddest place I've ever been. You know, if you're a Dem, you can't get elected dog catcher there. And they're very proud in Amarillo because they say, you know, when you all up in the north, during the Great Recession, your unemployment rate was 11% nationally. And of course, in communities of color, it was 25, 30, 40%. Down here in Amarillo, our unemployment rate was never over 4%. So you go, wow, what are they doing there that they have essentially full employment in Amarillo? And then I went into the Amarillo Independent School District and met with the superintendent of schools, see what's going on there. And what you find out is 65% of all the children in the public school system in Amarillo are on free and subsidized lunch programs every day. So what that means is everybody in Amarillo is working, and 2/3 of them aren't making enough to send their kids to school with money for breakfast and lunch. So that kind of scorecard for economic development is really not serving us very much. We need to look at who's getting the jobs and what's the quality of the jobs. So as I said, there are a broad range of for-profit and non-profit structures that are part of the mix of community wealth building. And I've mentioned it, social enterprise. And by the way, our food today, it has been brought to us by a social enterprise in your community, where you have an organization that creates a income-generating opportunity that helps fund their efforts and puts people to work that they're serving. Cooperatives, employee-owned firms, and so forth. And this, I know you can't read this, and I'm not going to belabor it, but the thing I want to leave you with is there are many different forms that can be leveraged and built in a community to reinforce community wealth building. Some of them are about individual asset accumulation. Others are cooperatives, employee ownership. By the way, you know, I'm old enough now. There are only a couple of you in this crowd older than me, I think, to remember that, you know, back in when I was coming up and starting to learn about things back in the late 60s, if you put on the table a proposition, how about this? I think that in American companies, the working men and women who are in these companies should really own them and control them. It kind of sounded like socialism. You know, workers owning the means of production. What are you talking about? That will never work in the United States. Well, in fact, through employee stock ownership plans now, which began in the 1970s, began, by the way, by a conservative Southern senator, Russell Long from Louisiana, and a kind of quirky economist named Louis Kelso. Today, through employee stock ownership plans, there are almost 11,000 companies in America in which the workers own all of the company or a portion. And of those 11,000 companies, they employ more people. This is how the labor market's changing in our country. They employ more people than are members of private sector unions in the United States anymore. Almost 11 million people working in firms that are owned by the workers themselves. And I'll say a few words about the benefits there. So there are many forms of community wealth building. Very quickly, I want to put a business proposition on the table for you. This is not a conversation I'm trying to generate that's political or social or ethical, although I think it has all those implications. Purely as a business proposition, this is what's available through community wealth building mechanisms. Cooperatives have 1/3 the failure rate of traditional companies in our country. Community land trusts, at the height of the recession, when communities like Cleveland were devastated with the subprime mortgages, community land trusts, another community wealth building mechanism, had 1/10 the foreclosure rate of conventional homeowner mortgages. Community banks, if you remember, those of you in the business community certainly do, when the Great Recession happened, credit dried up all over this country. You couldn't go and get a loan anymore. But community banks, not the big national banks, the Wells Fargo's, the Bank of America and so forth, locally owned banks made substantially more loans. Employee ownership companies, I just mentioned, workers in those employee-owned companies, because they own equity in the company, have 2.5 times the retirement account of people who work in companies where they're contributing to a 401k, for instance. So there are clear economic advantages. And to the individuals, this is based on study of social enterprise, like the one that gave us our breakfast here. As people who have barriers to employment, particularly, they may have criminal records, they may have low educational attainment, it's very hard to get jobs in normal businesses. When they go to work for social enterprise, this was a study done out in the San Francisco Bay Area of hundreds and hundreds of people who had gotten jobs through social enterprise. The government transfers, our tax dollars going for welfare, dropped dramatically. Their monthly income increased dramatically. Their people in stable housing increased dramatically. So these are some of the kinds of benefits that can be achieved in a local economic development strategy through the use of community wealth building, and there's actual data to prove this. So I will give you a couple models quickly, and then wrap up by talking about Cleveland, and we'll throw it open to questions and so forth. This is a company, for-profit company, cooperative, worker cooperative, out in the San Francisco Bay Area. It's a cleaning cooperative. You would call up this company, it used to be called Wages, now it's called Prospera. You would call them up and say, you know, I need 2 women to come and clean my house, or clean our office, you know, that sort of thing, where you can have people come in. That industry is notorious for the low wages it pays, just notorious, and the kinds of chemicals it uses in cleaning houses. So over 100 women in the Bay Area have gotten together and created, most of them are newcomer immigrant women from Central America, have come together and built these for-profit worker cooperatives that they are the owners of. They're now earning $15 an hour compared to essentially minimum wage before. They have health benefits, and their niche is they use green cleaning products. So it's better for them and it's better for their clients. So this is a way to organize labor, for-profit company, pays its taxes, very successful, and the people who are working there are earning probably about 100% more than if they were working for one of these companies where you're still paying them $20 an hour, but the women are only getting $7.50. Another is in New York State, Graceland Bakery. It has been going now for 20 years or so, and they have about 85 employees. None of these companies are huge, but they're relevant, I think, to the size of a community like yours or Cleveland. Many of the people are formerly incarcerated. They make brownies, they make tremendous products, and they now have a contract with Ben & Jerry's ice cream. So if you get like Ben & Jerry's cookie dough ice cream or something, some of their ingredients are going into that. Pioneer Human Services is in Seattle. This is a nonprofit that works with people who are homeless, drug addicts, recovering alcoholics, and the like. And when they started, they were 100% grant funded. So it'd be like your community foundation was giving them grants, and they realized This isn't sustainable. If we keep chasing grants all the time, we're just never going to get ahead. We need to take care of our own business. And so they started a line of for-profit businesses. They actually do manufacturing of some parts of airplanes for Boeing. They have a hotel that they run. They have a catering service. And the people who work in all these companies are their clients, the people who they're trying to help in that recovery. They now employ 540 people. That's an enormous nonprofit. And $78 million revenue last year, 95% of their revenue is self-generated now. So this is a community wealth mechanism. It's employing people who've been hard to employ. It's based in Seattle. It has a Seattle board. This Pioneer Human Services is never moving to Phoenix. It's never moving to China. Its mission is to stay in the community and continue to provide quality service and employment for people who need it. Another way of organizing a company through community wealth building. New Community Corporation, this is what's called a Community Development Corporation. Most CDCs, Community Development Corporations, focus on housing development. But a number, like New Community, are focused on job creation. So this is a nonprofit corporation based in Newark. Again, it's never going to move. It's been there a long time, since 1968, started by a Catholic priest. At one time, this nonprofit was the second largest employer in the entire city of Newark, outside the city government. Its assets exceed $500 million, again, in the community, and providing over 600 jobs for people from low-income neighborhoods. And I'm working in the market. They own a share of the supermarket. Again, they've got catering, they've got bus service, all kinds of things. And finally, and then I'll move to Cleveland, this is a very interesting model out in San Diego. And you always hear about San Diego, and it's so successful, and it's so sunny, and everybody looks great. Well, they've got poverty there, too. So what happened was a local foundation decided to make an investment, not just give grants. They were actually going to make a substantial investment in a community and see if they could create new assets and wealth there. And so they invested $65 million, huge amount of money for them, into building a cultural and retail zone in this very devastated neighborhood where there was just no business activity at all. And it's been very successful, and you can see videos of it. But the really cool thing from the community wealth building standpoint is then the foundation said, you know, we don't want to own this forever. We're not business owners, we're philanthropists. And so they created what they call, you've heard of an IPO, you know, like Google does an IPO. This is called a DPO, a direct public offering. And they offered shares, like at $50 or $100, in this enterprise to community residents who bought them and who are now owners in part of this. And the goal is to transfer 50% of the ownership to people who live in the community, who are among, in your context, there would be transferring shares to the 25% of the residents of your community who are living below the poverty line. That's the owners of this now. I saw a video where a woman, on the day they first gave shares to people, they had a big event, you know, a tent outside and stock certificates, and the people came up. And I saw this incredible video that was, for me, it was very moving, where the woman who got her share, like her $50 share, they asked her, what does this mean to you? And she said, I think this really profound thing. She said, I never thought a person like me would be ever able to own something like this. Because she had such a ceiling on her expectations of what was possible. And breaking that open and becoming an owner through the shared ownership mechanism is a transformative experience. And you know, for anyone in this room, we all know, and many of you are business owners, we all know if we really wanted to go into business and own something, we could do that. We either have the capacity, we have the training, we have the education, we either have the money, or we can go to our family, maybe and friends, or we have credit so we can max out our credit card and build that. But not these people. Imagine living a life where that was just, you just thought that was never possible. And then the flip that happens when that's transformed through a mechanism like this. So those are some of the community wealth strategies. I should say, we at the Democracy Collaborative are working with mayors all over the country who are starting to embrace this form of community wealth building. In Richmond, California, I'll be there in 2 weeks. Dwight Jones, the mayor there, has actually started the nation's first office of community wealth building. It's in the city government. It has a line item. Its intent is to do all the things that I've been talking about. In Rochester, New York, Mayor Warren there has started what she's calling a market-driven community cooperative corporation, drawing on the large anchor institutions to create businesses and jobs in the community. Finally, I'd like to close with Cleveland. So I don't know, have a lot of you been to Cleveland? Yeah? Okay, good. So whatever your view of Cleveland is, and lots of people have negative views, I hope by the end of this I won't transform it. So this is Cleveland, that's Lake Erie. The Rock Hall of Fame is the white building. The hapless Cleveland Browns play in that stadium to the right. Somewhere in the distance is LeBron James transforming the city. But this picture and that headline was at the top of a full-page article in the last couple months in the Toronto Star in Canada. Now, if you know Toronto and Cleveland could hardly be more different, right? Toronto is like Seattle or San Francisco. It's one of the hottest markets in the country. There are more cranes up there. It looks like Shanghai, China. And it's amazing what's going on in that city. And so one day we opened the paper, because I have friends in Canada, and there's this big picture of Cleveland and this headline, Anchored in Hope. And the whole article is about what do we in Toronto have to learn from Cleveland, Ohio? Which was mind-blowing for everybody in Cleveland, because really, learning from us, that's fabulous. And what they have to learn, according to the Toronto Star, which is the largest circulation daily newspaper in the country, is this story. So, in Cleveland, we're blessed really with, as a legacy of the manufacturing strength of Cleveland, we have these great legacy institutions, the Cleveland Clinic, University Hospitals, Case Western. These are called anchor institutions. A lot of times they're called eds and meds for higher ed and healthcare. At one time, by the way, Cleveland was in the top 5 richest cities in America. It's back in the 1950s. Today, it's consistently ranked the second poorest city in America. At one time, by the way, half of all, this is mind-blowing to me, half of all the millionaires who lived in the world lived in Cleveland, Ohio. It's where John D. Rockefeller is from. He's buried today. Half of all the millionaires. There are more Fortune 500 corporations headquartered in Cleveland than any city in the United States except New York City. Today there are 2 left. So there's been this kind of collapse of the local economy, and now there's an effort to rebuild, and it's actually starting to it's getting traction. And the rebuilding is designed particularly around the anchor institutions, because they're rooted in place. You know, frankly, I bet businesses in your community in the next 100 years will come and go. What you see out there won't be there. But I bet that in 100 years, Franklin and Marshall will be here. And that's what's called an anchor institution. The Cleveland Clinic will be there. So they're rooted in place. They can't get up and leave because they have so much sunk capital costs. And they have some self-interest in having a place where they can't exit be a decent place. Together, these institutions are spending more than $3 billion annually. And they all exist in a little circle. And that's just for procurement, for supplies and so forth. It's not construction, it's not their salaries that they're paying. Tens of thousands of people. This map, I realize it's difficult. This is where the anchor institutions are, those big eds and eds. These are the neighborhoods. I live right there. That's called Glenville. 98.5 African American population, 98.5%. We calculate the unemployment rate when you take into account people who've just given up looking for work anymore, so they're not even counted in the Labor Department statistic. The unemployment rate is about 40%. The median household income for a family of 4 in my neighborhood is below $18,500. And the national poverty level for a family of 4 household is about 22,000, I think 23,000. Everywhere you see a dot on this map, that's a sign of distress. It could be vacant property, it could be abandoned houses, people who aren't paying the taxes on their houses because they can't afford to, where water has been shut off, etc. And by the way, this data is, we need to update this. This map's from 2006. That predates the recession and predates the mortgage crisis. So it has only gotten worse. And yet, right in the middle of it are these institutions spending $3 billion every year. So clearly, that money is exiting the community. And so we started a strategy called the Greater University Circle Initiative to break down the barriers between the neighborhood and the community and get that money flowing. By the way, I said place matters at the beginning in terms of focus and community wealth building. This is what I mean. So this is my neighborhood, Glenville. The adjacent neighborhood is Huff. In Huff, again, 98.5% African American, the life expectancy for a man is 64 years in Huff. 8 miles to the east is a suburb that's 80% white, that's called Lyndhurst. The life expectancy for a male there is 88 years. So in 8 miles, you have a 24-year difference in life expectancy. So this kind of issue that we're talking about is not just sort of tactical or political. It becomes literally a life and death issue. And it's a very, very serious business. And by the way, the correlation there is not only between race, but it's between income and wealth attainment levels. So this is what you find. This is a few blocks from my house. This is the kind of thing you find as a result of boarded up properties and so forth. So one of the strategies, and this is where I'll wrap up, one of the strategies that we have developed is to create new businesses in the community, employing people in the neighborhoods, specifically targeting their employment locally to people in need, and creating the businesses linked to the supply chain of the large institutions, the hospitals, the universities, and the like. And so to date, we have 3 businesses up and running. We have 120 employees, so we're still small, but it's, again, starting to pick up. They're organized as worker cooperatives, by the way, so that, now they look very much like a traditional business. You've got a board, you've got a CEO, and so forth. But you've got ownership. Every person who works in the company, after they've been there over a year, owns 1 share of stock in the company. So everybody's got 1 share, and as the companies are profitable, they participate in profit. So we have 120 employees, and 35 have attained membership now. So they're owners of the company. One's called the Evergreen Cooperative Laundry, 1 Evergreen Energy Solutions, and 1 Green City Growers. And I won't go through all this except because I've touched on this, but the bottom bullet, and I don't know if you can see it, it says a job alone is not enough. And that's been our mantra in this business development strategy, because it's our view that if you're hiring people from households with a median income of $18,500, it's very likely you're going to be hiring people who are unbanked, they have no savings account, probably don't have a good credit history, don't have any retirement funds themselves, probably aren't sitting on $4,000 or $5,000 of cash somewhere that if their roof blows off, they can repair the roof. So we said, we can't just offer a job, even if it's a living wage job, we need to find a way to supplement people's salary with some additional asset accumulation, because that's what wealth building is about. And that's why we created the ownership structure of a cooperative, so that people could have not just a job, but be able to participate in building up their own individual wealth. And our goals here were to, anchor these businesses in Ohio, stop money from leaking out. If a hospital is buying its lettuce from California, that money's all legal. But if it's buying its lettuce from a vendor 2 miles away, it's recirculating in the community. So let me just show you. So this is one of our crews. with Evergreen Energy Solutions. It's a renewable energy company based in a low-income neighborhood, Glenville, Ohio. It has about 35 workers in it. It's doing large solar installations and selling the electricity to the anchor institutions that, by the way, the anchors all want to be greener. They have sustainability plans. In Northeast Ohio, if you're buying electricity, it's from coal-fired energy plants. So we said, well, let's start building renewable energy. The institutions will buy it from us, and they can claim credit for being greener because they are being greener. We also do LED retrofitting and so forth of parking garages. Excuse me. This is one of our crews out in the dead of winter, 2 winters ago. It's pretty cold, Northeast Ohio. This is the largest urban solar farm that we know of in the country. 5,000 solar panels in a very low-income neighborhood, producing 1 megawatt of renewable energy every year for the hospitals and universities. You know, a lot of people said, you can't put this in this neighborhood. People are going to trash it. People trash everything in this neighborhood. You know, that perception of what a low-income neighborhood's like. We've had this up for 2 years. We've had one rock thrown through one of those panels in 2 years. And there's no guard dogs, there's a fence, but there's no security. People see it as an asset in their community, and they want to honor them. Evergreen Cooperative Laundry, it's not the kind of laundry you and I have. We have a 30-foot long washing machine, for instance. It's pretty cool. You should see the sheet folder. It's just awesome. You put the sheet in, and it comes out like in 5 seconds. Perfect. It does 10 million pounds of bed linen for hospitals, nursing homes, hotels, and so forth. Year-round facility. And it's profitable, by the way, as is the renewable energy company. And finally, Green City Growers is a large hydroponic food production greenhouse right in the heart of the city, growing 3 million heads of lettuce and 300,000 pounds of herbs like basil for the local food market. So this is a fabulous project in February. It's snowing outside, you walk in, it's like 72 degrees, it's just awesome. Just something about the economic impact, because obviously to build these things costs a lot of money. So are we getting any benefit out of it? This was as of December 31st of last year, so the figures will be quite a bit bigger now because we've started to reach some scale. But you'll see that over time of this project, we paid about $6.25 million in wages to people who were formerly unemployed. We're paying payroll taxes of over $500,000. We offer a full health package, $300,000. We do a lot of training of people because they've been out of the labor market, so they need all kinds of skills training, including financial literacy. Because these are worker-owned companies, we do open book management, so they need to be able to read a P&L and see how the company's doing. It took a long time to get to profitability, but we've distributed about $55,000 in profits last year. We'll be distributing more this year. And this, I think, is important. We pay property tax because we're for-profit businesses, whereas nonprofits don't. We paid almost $500,000 in property taxes, 65% of which went to the local school system. The hope is that we can get a network of 10 and 12 and 15 of these companies, all producing these different kinds of goods and services in different business lines and helping to revive the economy of this area. So this is what we call the Cleveland model, just to summarize, and before I wrap up and we ask questions or comments. The anchor institutions, the eds and eds, make agreements to direct some of their supply chain to these local businesses that we start up. They're cooperatives. And the cooperatives make a commitment to hire from the surrounding community and pay living wages. And by the way, stay in Cleveland, not to leave. The local philanthropy, the community foundation, as well as other funders have put in grant money to help start for-profit businesses, which is very, very unusual. What they do is they put it into a revolving loan fund we created, and then it's turned from grant money into a 1% loan so that these businesses get very preferential loans. The city government has put federal money into this project in terms of 20-year loans. Again, all this is debt, but it's being repaid. And the city government helps us assemble land and so forth. And then we've created a nonprofit corporation called the Evergreen Cooperative Corporation, which owns some equity in all these for-profit companies and provides overall guidance and vision and makes sure the social mission is there, because we both have to, have a for-profit, we gotta be in the black and make a profit or the whole thing goes away. But we have a social mission too, which is really to transform these neighborhoods. These are some of the actors. If you remember when Hillary Clinton was first lady, she wrote famously this book called It Takes a Village, to raise a child. It was about how, education's not just for a teacher, it's the whole village has to help. It kind of takes the whole community to do economic development this way. This is not just for the Economic Development Office or the business community or the nonprofits, everybody working together. And these are some of the groups that have participated in this. And there are tables set in the city where the structures where these institutions are all embedded to keep moving forward this strategy. So this kind of economic development is really about people and it's about place. That's sort of the final lesson. Too much economic development is about bricks and mortars and stuff, in my view. And so this is the difference here. Finally, a lot of this was informed by a worker ownership model that has been developing in Spain for the last 50 years. And some of you may have heard of it. It's called the Mondragon Cooperatives. And Mondragon I was just there 3 weeks ago. Mondragon is in what's called the Basque country in Spain. And the Basques are an ethnic group very different from the other Spaniards. It's a totally different language, history, they look different, everything. And what occurred was during the lead up to World War II, there was the Spanish Civil War, as you no doubt know from your history. And the Basques sided with what's called the Republic against the dictator at the time, General Franco. And General Franco was literally a fascist dictator. I don't say that like, people, you fascists? No, he's literally a member of the fascist party, like Hitler was, and like Mussolini. And when World War II ended, as we know, Hitler and Mussolini died. But General Franco lived. In fact, he lived and ran Spain until the mid-1970s. That's how long he stayed in power. And he hated the Basques because they opposed him. So he did everything to exterminate their culture. He forbid the teaching of the Basque language. He closed their schools. There was no aid from the federal government. So the Basque people became just absolutely dirt poor. I talked to an old Basque gentleman who had been around at this time. He was in his 90s. And I said, how bad was it in those days? And he said, in your country a few years ago, you had this thing called Katrina that was so terrible for the people in Louisiana. He said, for us, it was like Katrina every year in the mountains. That's what it was like, constantly. So the Basque people said, we've got to do something because no one's coming to save us. And so they created a worker cooperative. 5 students and a priest came together and created this first worker cooperative to manufacture these little stoves. After 50 years, this is what's happened. They now are an integrated network of 120 companies. They have 85,000 employees, all of whom are owners of the Mondragon Cooperative Corporation. 85,000 worker owners. They have a bank, it's now the 3rd largest bank in all of Spain, Caja Laboral. They fund all this. If you take their whole body of companies together as one company, they're the 7th largest corporation in Spain. Last year they made about 24 billion with a B, $24 billion US in revenues. And in Spain right now, the financial crisis that we've weathered to a great extent in this country, they still call it the crisis. The unemployment rate in Spain now is 25%. Among people 18 to 35, the unemployment rate is about 50%. In the Basque country, it's never gotten above 9%. Because they have a strategy here to keep employment and to retain employment through this worker ownership, wealth building model. So, this is the aspiration, I think, for a lot of our communities. Can you really get to scale over time and do something extraordinary in your community? So, to end with, Dr. Einstein, we cannot solve our problems with the same thinking we used when we created them. And so what I'm suggesting to you is there may be new approaches to economic development, perhaps of relevance here. So thank you very much, and I appreciated you're very attentive at this time.
Thanks for joining us in Shared Ownership by Assets Lancaster. Thanks to our sponsors, ERX Contracting and Solutions by CAT, marketing and advertising with passion. This has been For Your Info Podcasts.